They didn't talk to each other first. They didn't compare experiences. They didn't coordinate reactions. And yet the same conclusion formed everywhere you went, instantly, independently, without effort. That's the detail most people miss. Because agreement usually requires discussion. When people reach the same conclusion without speaking, it means something in front of them was undeniable. You didn't present yourself. You didn't frame who you were. You didn't guide perception. You stepped away from influencing the outcome. And that's when perception settled into place. Most people are readable because they are reactive. Their tone shifts under pressure. Their posture changes around authority. Their behavior adapts when approval is at stake. That's why opinions about them scatter. With you. That scatter never happened. Your behavior stayed consistent across environments, across hierarchies, across expectations. And consistency at that level does something unexpected. It removes interpretation. When there's nothing to decode, the mind stops searching for advantage. It settles on certainty. That was the reaction you created. Not curiosity, not admiration, certainty. You weren't difficult to understand. You were difficult to move. Influence requires access, emotional openings, reaction windows, small adjustments people can use. You didn't offer any. You didn't resist. You didn't comply. You simply didn't shift. And stillness at that level causes environments to adjust. People unconsciously orient around fixed points. Loud personalities draw attention. Reactive personalities invite control. Fixed points bring order to space. You didn't orbit rooms. Rooms adjusted to you. Different settings, different power structures, same outcome. That's when the silent agreement formed. Not because anyone planned it, but because no alternative explanation held. This person doesn't chase alignment. Alignment forms around them. And when multiple observers arrive at the same conclusion independently, it stops being opinion and becomes established understanding. Behavior changes follow patterns, not opinions. Conversations shortened when you entered, not quieter from fear, but more deliberate. People measured words, adjusted timing, paused before acting, because someone who doesn't need validation cannot be approached in the usual way. You didn't assert control. You removed dependency. That's far more impactful. Most power dynamics depend on exchange, approval, resistance, reaction. You offered none. You listened without absorbing. You spoke without revealing. You stayed neutral without becoming distant. That combination is rare. And rarity produces agreement. No notes were needed because internal readings matched. Physical cues, timing, silence. The way you spoke when it mattered and withheld when it didn't. Every signal pointed in the same direction. This person is self-contained. And once that conclusion forms without coordination, it settles. It doesn't require reinforcement. It becomes the default lens through which you're perceived. That's why people stopped testing you, stopped improvising around you, stopped assuming outcomes could be guided. Because when someone doesn't react, the usual tools fail. Pressure becomes ineffective. Incentives become ineffective. Narratives fade away. You didn't mark the shift. You didn't announce it. You didn't protect it. You didn't need to. They reached the conclusion on their own. This isn't someone you manage. This isn't someone you rush. This isn't someone you redirect. This is someone you take into account immediately. And the moment that realization settles into a space, the dynamic is already decided. No debate, no discussion, no comparison required. Here is what they eventually understood, and why the conclusion kept repeating, no matter where you appeared. Systems are built on prediction. Social order depends on reliable responses. Authority only functions when it knows how pressure will be received. Most people are predictable because they are externally referenced. They react when challenged. They explain when misunderstood. They defend when questioned. They accelerate when observed. Each reaction gives the system leverage, a handle to pull. You removed every handle without confrontation. Your responses were not delayed to appear thoughtful. They were not rushed to appear confident. They arrived exactly when necessary and never earlier. That timing disrupted expectation. People read intent through emotional rhythm. When rhythm disappears, projection collapses. You were not cold. You were not warm. You were precise. Precision removes interpretation. When observers cannot project assumptions onto you, their internal models fail. That is when systems grow quiet. Silence is not absence. It is recalibration. You did not resist structure. You stepped outside its operating assumptions. You did not challenge roles. You made them unnecessary. Authority figures did not escalate around you because escalation produced no data. Peers did not compete because competition required reaction. Those seeking advantage did not test you twice because the first attempt returned nothing usable. Pressure without reaction becomes ineffective. Incentives without movement fade away. Narratives without emotional hooks dissolve. And when narratives dissolve, shared understanding forms quickly. This person does not operate on external triggers. That realization spreads without conversation. People feel it before they articulate it. They sense there is no access point, no emotional negotiation, no shortcut to influence. Behavior changes follow that realization. Not dramatically, precisely. People choose words more carefully. They stop filling silence. They stop assuming access. Familiarity disappears because familiarity is leverage and you never offered it. You were not guarded. You were complete. Guarded people leak tension. Complete people do not. Tension invites probing. Completeness shuts it down. Once that signal is detected, confirmation is unnecessary. Systems do not argue with constants. They adapt to them, quietly. You did not dominate conversations. You adjusted their structure. You did not control outcomes. You changed the field outcomes travel through. That is why the same conclusion kept forming. Not because people agreed with each other, but because the environment responded the same way every time. Fixed inputs produce predictable outputs. You became the fixed input. And when a fixed input enters a flexible system, the system adjusts efficiently, without drama. You did not create contrast. You created accommodation. Accommodation reveals limits more clearly than engagement. Engagement means involvement. Accommodation means acceptance. People do not accommodate what they believe they can move. They accommodate what they cannot. That was the unspoken understanding that formed. You cannot be accessed. You cannot be rushed. You cannot be guided. not because you fight it, but because there is nothing to access. And when effort produces no leverage, effort stops. Shared behavior follows. No announcements, no enforcement, just alignment around you. Reactions slow. Assumptions disappear. Performance loses value. People become more themselves because pretending has no reward. That is not intimidation. It is clarity. And clarity spreads faster than caution. This is why the conclusion followed you from place to place. Not reputation, not image. Conditions. The same conditions produced the same response every time, without coordination, without discussion, without comparison. This is where the shift becomes lasting, because once a conclusion forms without coordination, it stops being situational and becomes foundational. People no longer reassess you each time they meet you. They operate from what has already been established. You reach that point without declaration, without performance, without pressure. You did not ask to be understood. You did not try to impress. You did not posture for influence. You disengaged from the feedback loop. Most people are caught within. And when feedback disappears, influence mechanisms stop functioning. What eventually became clear to them was that you were not withholding information as a tactic. You genuinely did not need to provide it. Your center was no longer external. You were not calibrating behavior to outcomes. You were not measuring reactions to decide your next move. You moved from internal timing, and internal timing dissolves outside influence. That is why attempts to rush you stalled. That is why attempts to limit you softened. That is why labels stopped sticking. You did not disengage from them. They simply could not attach. When that happens, the environment does something very specific. It stops trying to define you and starts defining itself in relation to you. Expectations adjust, assumptions lower, strategies narrow. People become careful without becoming cautious. Caution is reactive. Carefulness is respect for boundaries that do not need to be announced. You created boundaries without drawing lines. You created limits without enforcing them. And those are the limits that last. Enforced boundaries invite challenge. Quiet boundaries invite acceptance. You were not unavailable. You were complete. Completeness can feel unfamiliar in a world built on need. Most interactions are negotiations disguised as conversation. Tone exchanged for reaction. Agreement exchanged for access. Enthusiasm exchanged for validation. You stepped out of that economy. You listened without trading. You spoke without selling. You paused without apology. And the moment people sensed that, attempts to take something from the exchange stopped. That requires participation. You were not participating. Not in avoidance, but in independence. That is when the conclusion finalized. This person does not rely on the room, which means the room cannot apply pressure to you, and pressure without effect does not escalate, it recedes. That shift is what people felt, often without knowing why. The way someone knows a door is locked without pulling twice. One test was enough. It did not move, adjustment followed. Most people never experience that. Not being tested repeatedly. Not being pushed to demonstrate consistency, because consistency had already revealed itself. Once that happens, visibility changes. You do not become louder. You become more stable. Stability attracts less noise and more alignment. Those who remain around you do so deliberately. Those who leave do so quietly. No drama, no disruption, just clarity. That is why this conclusion did not need repetition. It did not rely on story. It relied on experience. Experience does not need persuasion to be believed. One clean interaction was sufficient, and that is the quiet advantage you now carry. You do not manage perception. You do not maintain presence. You do not protect position. It is already integrated into how people respond to you. This is authority in its mature form, not the kind that demands recognition, but the kind that removes the question entirely. People do not wonder how to approach you. They know. They do not debate your role. They adjust to it. Adjustment is the clearest proof there is. You did not arrive as disruption. You became a reference point. Reference points do not argue with the environment. They define orientation. That is why everyone reached the same conclusion about you without needing to compare notes. There was nothing left to discuss. What follows after that conclusion settles is something most people never experience and rarely recognize until it is already established. The absence of pushback, not because you overwhelm anyone, not because you unsettle, but because there is no friction point left to push against. Friction is what systems depend on. Emotion, urgency, need, reaction. You left those behind by becoming internally complete. And completeness does not negotiate. It does not justify itself. It does not clarify misunderstandings. It simply exists. Existence at that level rewrites behavior without announcement. That is why the shift did not arrive with noise. It arrived with adjustment. People stopped overperforming around you. They stopped exaggerating. They stopped filling silence with unnecessary motion. Because extra display only works when someone needs reassurance. You did not. And when reassurance is unnecessary, showmanship falls away. Conversations shortened. Decisions simplified. Influence patterns evened out. Not because you enforced equality, but because leverage faded. You did not pull rank. You did not challenge rank. You rendered rank irrelevant by operating from a place it could not reach. That is the quiet command people sense and struggle to name. They do not call it strength. They do not call it authority. They feel something more settled. The sense that whatever they attempt next will not change the outcome. And when people feel that, they preserve energy. They choose precision. They move deliberately. That is why spaces feel different when you enter now. Not heavier. Clearer. Clear spaces do not invite disorder. They do not reward manipulation. They do not accept performative confidence. Everything unnecessary falls away. What remains is alignment. Some align by stepping closer. Others align by stepping back. Both responses confirm the same reality. You do not require participation to maintain position. You do not need consensus to hold center. The consensus already occurred without your involvement. That is why you do not have to defend this state. Defense suggests exposure. This state is not exposed, it is integrated. It is how people experience you before analysis begins. And once perception stabilizes at that level, it does not revert. It does not fluctuate. It does not require reminders. It becomes baseline. People do not wake up questioning who you are. They already know how to move around you. They already know what does not work. They already know what to sidestep. That knowledge did not spread through explanation. It spread through contact, through the immediate realization that effort produces no leverage here, that urgency finds no traction, that pressure returns empty. This is the rarest form of authority, not the kind that escalates tension, but the kind that resolves it before it begins. You did not set out to create it. You did not plan it. You did not perform for it. You arrived there by refusing to outsource your center, by choosing internal timing over external demand, by allowing silence to do the work. Noise never could. Once that happens, the environment responds the only way it can. It simplifies, it adjusts, it settles. Everyone reaches the same conclusion without needing to compare notes, because the conclusion is not an opinion. It is a response to reality as it presents itself. And you are no longer presenting yourself for interpretation. You are simply present. That is why this does not fade. That is why it follows you wherever you go, because it is not something you do. It is something you stopped doing. You stopped reacting. You stopped explaining. You stopped negotiating your position. And in that absence, something enduring took shape. The room already knows.